In this tutorial, we will refactor the project that the Maven web app Archetype created for us so that the project structure is an actual Struts 2 application. For my YouTube students, there will be a link in the description to my Udemy course where you will be able to download source code for all the examples. These are the high-level refactoring steps we will do so that we can have a baseline project structure that is more aligned with our needs to create our insurance agent administrator project. This will give us a working Struts 2 web application. The first step, we will rename our generated project. Then we will add all the required Struts 2 dependencies to our pom.xml. Then we will add the Struts XML config file and update the web.xml file. And in the final two steps, we will write a login action and the related JSP, and then we will add a logging interceptor as well so that we can write to our log file. So let's start by renaming our project. Then we rename it in our POM file as well. We will also rename it in our web.xml. Now let's update our POM file with the Struts 2 dependencies. We will expand our properties with the Struts 2 details. We are going to use version 2522, Log4j of 2121. Now we will add the Struts 2 dependencies. So first off, for the purpose of logging, we've added the Log4j core. We have added the Struts 2 core jar dependencies, as well as the Struts 2 config browser plugin. Next up, we're going to add our struts.xml configuration file, and we will expand our web.xml to specify the Struts 2 servlet. Now, before we can do that, we actually have to update the project structure to be aligned with a Maven project structure. So let's go ahead and do that. First, we'll create a Java folder underneath the main folder. Then we'll create a resources folder underneath the main folder. Now we will add our struts.xml config to our resources folder. This is our struts config. For now, we won't include the insurance config XML. As we can see, it's got a default action of index, and what this index will do is just redirect to an action named home under the insurance namespace. And at a later stage, we will define that here in our insurance.xml. Next up, we will expand our web.xml with all the required configurations for a Struts 2 application. As you can see, we've added the filter and filter mapping, and we set our welcome file as our index.jsp, which is still just a hello world at this stage. So let's do a Maven clean package and see if everything runs. Looks like our Maven clean package was successful, so let's run it. That looks good. The next step will be to add the home action in the insurance.xml. So going back to our struts.xml, we are now going to include the insurance.xml for our struts config. Now I will copy in the insurance.xml. And this is how our insurance.xml looks like. If you have followed along with the introductory courses, you'll see that we are adding the login interceptor. We are creating a namespace of insurance and a default action of home. And all this default action will do is to forward to insurance/welcome. And let's change this to a login, because this is actually going to be our login.jsp. Now, because we've added the logging interceptor for debugging, we will have to add the Log4j configuration. So let's copy that in. And this is our Log4j configuration file. And obviously, we're going to use com.nicordesigns for our package name. Going back to our insurance.xml, we see we need the insurance directory and the login JSP. So we will create that here. Let's paste in some code. Going back to our struts.xml, we see that if we type in the index action in the browser, it should redirect to our login JSP, because we've defined the home actions result to login.jsp. Now our landing page is still hello world, but here we can change this to a struts JSP with the struts tag and put in a URL redirect to our home action, which will land on the login JSP. So let's go ahead and do that. First, we'll add the struts tags. Then we'll add the URL redirect. So this redirect will also call the insurance home action. It will put in the English language locale parameter, and it should land us on the login page. So let's save and do a Maven build. We'll run the clean package on this project. That looks good. Now let's see what happens if we run it. Now we land on the hello world with the URL, the redirect to the login. And when we click on the URL, we get the login page. Now let's try this in a browser, and let's specify index.action here instead of the redirect. We see that the index action, as defined in our struts.xml, also redirects to the login page. Now for our final step, we are going to turn this into an actual login JSP, and it's going to be backed by a login action that we will write. So first, let's define the login action in the insurance XML. Here we define the login action class. The class, of course, we still need to write. It takes as the input the login JSP, and it redirects as the output to another welcome.jsp. We need to write the login class. We need to change the login JSP to an actual login, and we also need to write the welcome JSP. So let's start by writing the login class. Now, of course, this needs to be a working struts action. Now let's define the two strings of username and password and generate the getters for us. Now we can define the struts execute method, and we will do some basic checking of the password and username. So as we can see, the string execute checks if it's a valid username and password, and if it's not, it returns us back to the input page. Otherwise, it returns on success. Now currently our validation checking only checks the value has not been entered in the field. In other words, this is a very simple validation check. So this is our login action. Now obviously we need to go back to the login JSP and change this to a proper login form. So we'll put in the login form in the body. And as we can see, we've defined the action with the text field with the key of username and the label of administrator name. Since we defined these two keys, we will have to back them in our properties file. So let's do that. We create the matching package folder structure underneath our resources file to store our properties. Now we create the properties file where we will store the key of username and the key of password. The file will be called package.properties. And we will store the username and password properties. So now we have the login action. We have it defined in our inclusive struts.xml, which is insurance XML. Now, of course, we need to add the welcome JSP after a successful login. And for now, our welcome page will be a welcome to the administrator username that was entered in the login JSP. Now we'll do a Maven build in Eclipse again and see if our login action works. We select our clean package. That looks good. Looks like we've done a compile. Now we will run it. We will select the login page. And we can enter any values in here. So let's do that. And submit. And that looks good. That means our insurance action now is implemented end to end. Of course, it's not backed by a database. And that concludes our Maven Archetype refactoring tutorial.